booktube, it's Lady Cooper here, and today I'm bringing you my August wrap-up part 1 / currently reading. It's Friday. This isn't exactly a Friday reads because I'm not going to go into detail about what I'm reading or what I'm going to be reading, but you know, same thing. I have read 5 things so far this month, so let's just jump right into it. First thing I read was The Bear the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which I've already returned to the library. I read this right at the beginning of the month, before Tome Topple started, and this is Catherine Arden's debut novel. It is a historical fairy tale set in 14th century Russia. I thought it was going to be like a retelling of the Vasilisa myth. There are elements of that. It reads more like an inspired historical fairy tale. So this book follows a family living in, very northern rural Russia at the time. Father of the family is kind of like the lord of the region. I can't remember what the Russian term for it is, but it'd be like a feudal lord or a feudal baron. At the beginning of the story, the wife of the husband has had many children, and she is the daughter of a woman who was married to the Prince of Muscovy, who is said to have had magic. And she was married off into the north because everyone at court, was afraid of her mother and her mother's magic, etc. Now, the mother does not necessarily have magic herself, but she becomes pregnant with her last child, and everyone urges her not to keep it because they've had a hard winter. But she says, no, I have to have this child because this child is going to be like my mother. In other words, magical or magically inclined. Now, she does, of course, die in childbirth, as it always goes in these stories, and she entreats her husband to protect her daughter, Vasilisa. And the rest of the story, we skip ahead a little bit. We see her, Vasilisa, as a child. We see her as a young woman. And growing up, her father remarries to a somewhat wicked stepmother. But that plays into the book in different ways than like the traditional evil or wicked stepmother. And we see Vasilisa interact with the natural and magical world. The story itself becomes this study or this examination of not only gender roles and misogyny in a historical context, but also becomes this conflict between new religion and the old ways or folk ways, or just common sense in some regards. It's very much an exploration of the spread of Orthodox Christianity into Russia and the effect that has on social and cultural life in rural areas. And it throws up Western Christianity, Orthodox Catholicism, against the gods of nature and tradition and magic, essentially. And it's great. It's not doing anything like super radical or revolutionary with the genre of fairy tales or fairy tale inspired books or fairy tale retellings, like however you want to categorize this. It's not necessarily doing anything like crazy or super new, but it's just solid and interesting and entertaining. I love Vasilisa. I love her brother. Like, she has a couple of brothers, like the youngest one, who's like a couple years older than her. I love him. And I love the King of Winter. I think he is fantastically done. There's just like this, he's kind of sexy and seductive, but he's also, mysterious and dangerous, and you can't quite trust him. Like, he has this very inhuman mix of qualities that's great. And there is a Orthodox priest in the story who is one of the antagonists, and I think he is great. I mean, like, awful, hate him. But at the same time, the role he is performing in the story is fantastic, and the conversations that it brings up are interesting. I think if you want to get into kind of fairy tales or folklore inspired stories, this is a great place to start because it's not overly complex, it's not overwritten, and it's not too obscure or vague. If you wanted to like Deathless, but you were confused by Deathless, or you didn't understand Deathless, give this a try because it'd be like a much easier entry point into the genre. Or if just in general you liked Deathless or that kind of story, check this one out because it was pretty great. I will definitely keep my eyes open for Catherine Arden's next novel, and I hope she kind of stays in this sort of vein. My only gripe is that there is an author's note at the end where she talks about why she picked the spellings that she picked, because some of them are very Cyrillic, some of them are very Anglicanized, and she kind of just decided to do whatever the hell she wanted. Like, she basically says in her author's note that she spelled things the way she wanted them to spell so that they would be aesthetically pleasing to a Western eye. So she plays fast and loose with Russian names and spellings, and that rubbed me a little wrong, to be honest, because she's not Russian. She's an American, I think. Real strict students of Russian language and Cyrillic also might find it a little irritating. Otherwise, I liked it, cried at the end, not because it's sad, but it's good, and would highly recommend it. After that, I started Tome Topple. Now, I did do a Tome Topple TBR. I'll link it up above. You can check it out. I had a very ambitious Tome Topple TBR. I was planning on reading a minimum 2 books. I was going to try for a 3rd book. That didn't happen. The one thing I did read for Tome Topple was The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. I'm sure a lot of people have read this because these are super crazy popular books, and I read the first book back in like 2009. But I have been trying to get through this book since basically 2013. 2013 is when I picked it up originally, read about 1/3 of it, put it down after a year, and was like, I'll just come back to this in 4 years, I guess. So I have been trying to read this like all year. It's been on numerous TBRs. It was on my TBR for Tome Topple Round 3, in fact, and then a bunch of other monthly TBRs after that. I just was like not getting to it. I gave this 4 stars, I think. I like Stieg Larsson's writing style. One thing I will say, this book takes a hell of a long time to get started. About the first half is very excruciatingly slow. If you like Stieg Larsson's kind of rambling style, though, you know, you should be fine. And then the second half, it's just like so gripping. Like, even though I knew how this ended, and I knew quite a few of the steps obviously leading up to it because I've seen the Swedish adaptations, though not for a number of years, like not since like 2010 or 2011. But irregardless, even though I knew what was coming, I was still so gripped. And even though there were a lot of POVs in this, I was still quite gripped. So this book is really interesting. Obviously, it takes place after The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and it deals with, you know, first of all, Elizabeth kind of setting up this whole new life for herself after the Wernerstrom affair, and then coming back to Sweden, and one incident spins her entire world on its head, and suddenly there's this national manhunt for her. Mikhail, he's like, no, it couldn't be Elizabeth. So you've got him trying to prove her innocence, Elizabeth trying to connect all these threads and trying to figure out how she like wound up in the middle of this. And then you've got these police investigators trying to catch her because they are convinced that she did it. But even within that police investigation, we get so many different diverse profiles of different types of police officers. And one of the things that is great about this, and why I understand why there's like 300 pages where it seems like not a lot happens, is that Larsson, in his kind of rambling, meandering style, lays down so many themes that are subtly touched on, not explicitly. It's not something he's stating. Like, he'll talk about an issue, he'll talk about sex trafficking, or he'll have this offhand throwaway comment around page 100 about how, you know, this gal did her undergrad degree thesis on discrimination in the police force and how police deal with women in the course of investigations. And then 400 pages later, you suddenly have 6 police officer characters, and you're seeing the different ways that they deal with women in a police investigation. Or, you know, he'll spend 5 or 10 pages of Elizabeth going to IKEA, you know, again, around page 100 or around page 200, and she's furnishing this apartment, and we see it through her eyes, like solidly in her head, and she's so proud of herself, and she spends all this time, and she is like really satisfied. She finally has this place, and she's decorated herself, and it's great, and she is satisfied and happy and settled. And then back here, around page 600, Mikhail finds that apartment, and we suddenly see it through Mikhail's eyes. And we see that this thing that was this great accomplishment to Elizabeth was her furnishing 3 out of 18 rooms. And we didn't even know there were 15 other rooms because we were in her head. And it's just like this contrast of looking at the world and interpreting your situation and the way we are socially groomed to observe or to notice or to judge things. It's so interesting. And then there are so many contrasts between the author, who has fairly progressive feminist themes himself, with purposely writing these just like deeply misogynist characters who are not ever over the top. They at every point in time feel like real characters. They are men that you have encountered. They are men that you have had to work with. They are men that you've had to deal with. And it's brutal in many ways and aggravating. I was so angry and irritated reading a lot of it, but not because I didn't like what the author was doing. It was just that he was giving us this portrait of reality that is so unfair, and it's so irritating because it's also really goddamn true. Can you tell I love these novels? So I read that, and that was the only thing I read for Tome Topple, but you know what? That's been on my TBR for so long. I was really happy to finally have it finished. After that, I read The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherine Valente, which you've seen in like a library hall and at Currently Reading and etc. etc. This is a little series of vignettes, essentially, of superheroes and the female superheroes and the girlfriends of superheroes, narrating how they became tangled up with a superhero and how it eventually led to their death. Because this is an examination-ish, a commentary on the habit of content creators, especially male content creators, to fridge female characters for the emotional development of male characters. And this was great. So she never uses Marvel or DC, obviously. She never uses the names of Gwen Stacy, for example. But each of these profiles is a very thinly veiled reference to a specific Marvel or DC superhero or superhero's girlfriend. It opens with a gal named, in the book, Paige Emery, who is very clearly Gwen Stacy. This is great. If you are a comic book nerd at all, the feminist, read this. You have no excuse not to read this. I'm gonna read a section of it just so you can kind of get an idea for what I'm talking about. The rest is silence. Silence, and then a cough I couldn't shake, and the red marks on my skin like angry kisses, like spotlights, like the actual terrible, unfucking forgivable cliche that I was. The Daisy Show was such a hackfest, a product of its times. Heavy-handed, preachy, full of bullshit moralizing, and fucking Christ, what a predictable finale. What is this after-school special horseshit? It's the kind of thing some asshole in Ohio gets a National Book Award for writing while he screws his grad students and cries his way to tenure. My boyfriend took all the magic and left me with nothing but the dregs of realism. The Misha Malinov show was always the prime time attraction. I'm just some public access embarrassment. I died in a free clinic in the left armpit of Guinal City, and you know exactly what killed me, so just nod piously and spare me the humiliation of stitching on my scarlet A. Someone who didn't know me at all grabbed a dress at Goodwill and put me in the ground at the public's expense. Finally, government funding for the arts. The worst part of dying is that you never get to find out the end of the story. Did the insomniac finally defeat miasma? Fucked if I know. I didn't get that script. I was just deep dark past, the battery of sadness hidden in the hero's heart. And here's another great quote. I belong in the refrigerator, because the truth is, I'm just food for a superhero. He'll eat up my death and get the energy he needs to become a legend. It's really good. Check it out. Then after that, I read Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Sean McGuire. So this is obviously the sequel to Every Heart a Doorway. Everyone has read Every Heart a Doorway. Everyone's starting to, roll this one out. So I gave this 4 stars. I liked it better than the first one. I have a full, discussion, not necessarily a review, but a spoilery discussion. I'll link it up above for the first one. I thought the first one, the protagonist was really boring, in my opinion. And it's not because she's an ace character. I really need to clarify it. That's not the reason. I just felt like Portal World, the protagonist came from, was the most boring thing ever. So this follows 2 characters from that first book. It tells kind of the prequel story of their time in their Portal universe before they wound up at the boarding school. And it follows Jack and Jill. Everyone knows this. This reads 100% just like a fairy tale. It tells a lot. It doesn't necessarily show a lot. And that's, for the most part, fine. The first third of this book is just telling backstory. We don't, witness things happening. We're just told what is what and how people are and what they do and why they do it. And then they go to the moors, and that's pretty great. And I was really rocking along with the story, quite enjoyed it, teared up a little bit at one point, right up until the ending. And it's hard to explain why the endings in both of these books don't really come together for me. I feel like Maguire spends a lot of time telling and not showing, which is not necessarily bad, except she spends all that time telling and not showing, but in the end, in the last 2 chapters of both the first book and this book, she introduces a theme that is the entire emotional crux of the ending. Like, she introduces it at hell and gone the last moment. And she had 100 pages to tell me that theme or to show me that theme prior to the penultimate chapter. But she doesn't. She did it in the last book, in the last chapter. She did it in this book. The last book, she did it in Every Heart Jory. Not necessarily a theme. It was more like a motif that just kind of got muddled in the last chapter and didn't work as an emotional wow moment. This book, it was definitely a theme. And I think she tried to introduce it, but like, it hinged so strongly on one character who has very little screen time in this book. Again, it's like a character who's introduced 4 chapters from the ending, is only really like an active character in 1 chapter, part of a chapter actually, and then the entire emotional climax hinges on this theme attached to this character that's just so Hail Mary-ish that it just kind of throws me out of the book. So that's why I only got a 4-star. But if you liked the first book, you're gonna like this one. But you should read this because this is better. You know, everyone lauds Seanan McGuire just like to the high heavens. And she's not a bad writer, but her endings are not that great in my opinion. So just... Anyways, I still gave it 4 stars. And then the last thing I've read, oh my gosh, this video got real long. And the last thing I read was The Curse of the Pharaohs by Elizabeth Peters. This is the 2nd book in the Amelia Peabody mysteries. These are just fluffy, late Victorian mystery novels that have a lot of archaeology in them. They take place in Egypt. There's always like murders, ridiculousness. This book I gave 4 stars just because it's fun. They're not the most culturally sensitive, and I go back and forth on how I feel about this because there's obviously a lot of imperialism. There's a reference in this one to the Red Indian, which just put me on my back foot when I read it. So they're very much a product of the author was writing in the late 70s and the 80s. She's writing about characters where it's not necessarily out of character for them to act this way. They can be a little condescending to the native Egyptians too. They're Englishmen, right? So again, that's not out of character, but at the same time, I just feel like it's so unnecessary. So they haven't aged that well. But like, the mysteries are just fun and entertaining, and the protagonist, Amelia, is not someone I would necessarily be good friends with in real life. She's so domineering, but it's really entertaining to read as a character. Her husband is the same way, like super domineering, but also like really hilariously entertaining. One thing I really did love is that, man, they are so in love with each other, even though they are like constantly fighting with one another. It's done affectionately, and I really liked that. So I do like their relationship. Their son in this one, who has a little tiny part, is adorable. Kind of one of those things, I'll read 1 a month. Those are my very in-depth thoughts about some of the things I've read so far this month. Sorry this video got probably kind of long and rambly. Let me know if you've read any of these books down below, if my, blithering about them has inspired you to pick them up. And I very nearly forgot to talk about what I'm reading next. So just tacking this on at the end of the video, I have picked up and started reading Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. This is a book set in the 80s in Italy about the son of a professor whose father has a grad student staying with him for 6 weeks in the summer to work on his paper. And I think the son and the grad student have a tumultuous whirlwind affair. I'm only like 10 pages into this. I just started it. The beginning is soul crushing. I have a feeling this book's gonna break me a little bit, but I'm just like super excited to read it. And obviously there is a movie coming out with Arnie Hammer, who looks delightful, and Sufjan Stevens did the soundtrack, so I'm gonna be all over that. That's everything I have to talk about. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.